Christmas Eve, 1887. Snow fell heavy on the Wyoming Territory. Each flake a silent witness to Eli Mercer's solitude. He stood at the frost-covered window of his cabin, watching the empty road disappear into white behind him. His 6-year-old daughter Hannah arranged pine cones on the rough-hewn table, humming a carol her mother used to sing. 2 years. 2 years since fever had taken Sarah, leaving him with a child to raise and a heart too wounded to feel. Eli had poured his grief into work, his love into Hannah alone. The rest of the world could stay beyond his fence line. "Papa, do you think she'll come today?" Hannah's voice broke through his thoughts. Eli's jaw tightened. The mail-order bride. He'd answered that advertisement 3 months ago. Not from hope, but from duty. Hannah needed a woman's presence. He needed help with the homestead. Love had nothing to do with it. "The stage was due at noon," he said flatly. "If she's coming, she'll be here." Hannah bounced on her heels. "I hope she's kind, Papa, and pretty, and likes Christmas." Eli said nothing. He hoped she was practical and sturdy, someone who wouldn't expect more than he could give. A knock shattered the silence. Hannah gasped. "She's here." Eli's boots felt heavy as he crossed the cabin. His hand paused on the door latch. He took one breath, then opened it. A woman stood in the snow. Her dress was threadbare and patched in 3 places. Her shoes were worn through at the toes, wrapped with cloth against the cold. She clutched a single carpet bag, her knuckles white. Her face was pale from the journey, but her eyes dark and steady held no shame. Eli's stomach dropped. This was not what he had expected. She spoke his name like a question and a prayer combined. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Margaret, your bride." Behind him. Hannah pushed past his legs, her small face lighting up like sunrise. "Papa, she's cold." "Let her in." Eli stared at Margaret's poverty, at the rags that barely kept out winter's bite. His first instinct was to close the door, not from cruelty, but from fear. What had he agreed to? What desperate circumstances had driven this woman to his doorstep? But Hannah was, already reaching for the stranger's hand, and Eli found he could not move. The winter wind howled between them, carrying snowflakes across the threshold like scattered promises. Margaret stepped across the threshold, and snowflakes melted on her patched shoulders like tears. She carried herself with quiet dignity despite her circumstances, her spine straight, her chin level. No apology lived in her posture. Hannah tugged at her father's sleeve. "Papa, she's frozen. She needs warm coffee." "Hannah," Eli started, but his daughter was already pulling Margaret toward the fire. "Sit here, Miss Margaret. This is the warmest spot. Papa built this fireplace himself. He's very good at building things." Margaret allowed herself to be guided. She sank into the chair, and for just a moment, her composure flickered, exhaustion and relief crossing her features before she gathered herself again. "Thank you, child," she said, her voice gentler than Eli expected. "You have your father's kind heart." Eli nearly laughed at that. His heart hadn't been kind in 2 years. Hannah disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a cup of coffee. Eli recognized it immediately, Sarah's cup, the one with the chipped handle that she'd refused to throw away. His daughter handed it to Margaret with ceremony. "This was Mama's favorite cup," Hannah explained. "She said it had character." Margaret's hands shook slightly as she accepted it. "Then I'm honored to use it." She drank, and color began returning to her cheeks. Eli watched from the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. He should ask about her circumstances. He should inquire about her journey. Instead, he studied her, the careful patches on her dress, each stitch precise despite the rough fabric, the way she held the cup with both hands, savoring the warmth, the steadiness in her eyes when she looked up and found him watching. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly, "I know this isn't what you expected." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She didn't flinch. I can explain my circumstances if you'll allow. Later. His voice came out harsher than intended. Hannah, show Miss Margaret to the spare room. She'll need rest after her journey. Hannah beamed. Come on. Miss Margaret, I helped Papa clean it special for you. As they disappeared down the hall, Eli turned to the window. The snow was falling harder now, covering any tracks. If he was going to send her back, he'd need to decide soon, before the roads became impassable. From the spare room, he heard Hannah's chatter and Margaret's patient responses. Then something unexpected, his daughter's laughter. Bright and genuine. A sound he hadn't heard in months. Eli's hands clenched at his sides. One night, he told himself, he'd give her shelter through Christmas. Then he'd decide. But even as he made the bargain, he knew something had already shifted. Hannah's laughter echoed through the cabin like a ghost returning to life. Evening settled over the cabin like a wool blanket, heavy and insulating. Outside, the wind had died to whispers. Inside, the fire crackled its steady rhythm while Hannah sat at the table, showing Margaret her collection of bird feathers. This one's from a bluebird, Hannah explained. Papa found it by the creek. And this one, Eli retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to prepare supper, but really to create distance. He could hear them clearly. Margaret's voice warm with interest, Hannah's bright with excitement. Miss Margaret, can you help me hang my stocking? Mama always helped me. Of course, little one. Show me where. Eli paused his work, listening. He heard the scrape of a chair, Hannah's directing, Margaret's gentle compliance. When he finally allowed himself to look, he saw them at the fireplace, Hannah on tiptoe, Margaret steadying her as she hung a small knitted stocking from a nail. There, Margaret said. Perfect. Hannah stepped back to admire it, then looked up at Margaret with the devastating honesty of children. Miss Margaret, can I tell you something? Anything. Little one, Papa doesn't smile anymore. Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper. Not since Mama went to heaven. He used to smile all the time. Now he just works and worries. Eli's chest tightened. He should interrupt, should spare Margaret this confession. But his feet wouldn't move. Margaret knelt to Hannah's height, taking the child's small hands in her own. Grief is love with nowhere to go. Little one, your Papa's heart is full of love for you. Sometimes when we lose someone precious, we forget how to show it, but it's there. I can see it in everything he does. Hannah considered this. Do you think he'll remember how to smile again? I think, Margaret said softly, that little girls who ask brave questions often help their papas remember important things. Eli turned away, unable to watch anymore. He finished supper preparations with mechanical efficiency, his mind churning. When he called them to eat, he kept his eyes on his plate, speaking only when necessary. After supper, Margaret insisted on washing dishes. Eli didn't argue. He took Hannah to bed, listened to her prayers, kissed her forehead. When he returned to the main room, he found Margaret had not only cleaned the dishes, but mended Hannah's torn stocking, the one his daughter had, snagged that morning. She looked up from her needle. I hope you don't mind. I noticed the tear. Fine, he said shortly. He grabbed his coat and escaped to the barn. The cold hit him like punishment, and he welcomed it. He stood in the darkness, gripping his workbench, the same bench where he'd once carved toys for Hannah, where he'd shaped the cradle Sarah had so loved. His hands had been still for 2 years, his heart even more so. Through the barn's small window, he could see the cabin glowing with lamplight. Inside, a woman in rags was tending his home with more care than he'd shown it. His daughter was smiling, and he was hiding in a freezing barn. Sarah, he whispered to the darkness. What have I done? The silence offered no answers. But when he finally returned to the cabin, he found Margaret had banked the fire carefully and left a lamp burning low for him. Beside it, Hannah's mended stocking hung perfect and whole. Eli stood in the quiet cabin. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt the weight of his loneliness as something that might possibly be changed. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight turning the snow to diamonds. Hannah woke first, her excited footsteps pattering across the cabin floor. Eli heard her gasp of delight from his bed and rose quickly. He found her at the fireplace, holding her stocking with wonder. Inside was a small wooden bird, carved from kindling scraps, humble but beautiful, with delicate wings and a turned head that seemed almost alive. "Papa, look what was in my stocking." Margaret emerged from her room, still in her threadbare dress but with her hair neatly brushed. She smiled at Hannah's joy. "It's a chickadee," she said. "They're brave little birds. They stay through winter when others fly away." Hannah clutched the bird to her chest. "Did you make this, Miss Margaret?" "I did. I hope you like it." "I love it." Hannah launched herself at Margaret, wrapping small arms around her waist. "Thank you. Thank you." Over Hannah's head, Margaret's eyes met Eli's. He saw uncertainty there had she overstepped. Eli managed a stiff nod. "That was kind of you," he said. The days that followed took on a careful rhythm. Margaret rose early, had coffee ready when Eli came in from morning chores. She tended the cabin with quiet efficiency, patching drafts, organizing the pantry, stretching their provisions with skill that spoke of hard experience. Hannah shadowed her constantly. "Miss Margaret, teach me to make biscuits. Miss Margaret, show me that stitch. Miss Margaret, tell me about Missouri." Eli watched from his careful distance. He took meals quickly, spoke in short sentences, retreated to work whenever possible. His heart remained armored, his walls firmly in place. Yet he noticed things. The cabin felt less empty. Hannah's nightmares, those terrible dreams where she cried for her mother, had ceased. Margaret's presence filled spaces he hadn't realized were hollow. One evening, Hannah brought him a sampler she'd been working on with Margaret's help. The stitching was crooked but earnest. "Home is where love grows." "Miss Margaret helped me with the hard letters," Hannah said proudly. "She's a good teacher." "Papa, did you know she was a real school teacher in Missouri?" Eli looked at the sampler, then at his daughter's hopeful face. "It's fine work." Hannah Bird. "Miss Margaret says I have patient hands, like Mama did." The mention of Sarah no longer brought only pain. Something else mingled with it now, something like gratitude. That night, after Hannah slept, Eli sat at his workbench. His hands reached for carving tools that had gathered dust for 2 years. Almost without conscious thought, he began to shape a block of pine. A flower emerged. Simple, with 5 petals and a curved stem. Not his best work. His hands were out of practice. But it was something. He told himself it was for Hannah. But when he finished, he set it aside carefully, wondering if Margaret would find it beautiful despite its roughness. The second week of January brought bitter cold and clear skies. Eli rode to the north pasture to check on the cattle, leaving Margaret and Hannah to their domestic rhythm. When he returned at dusk, he found them at the table. Heads bent over Hannah's primer. "Sound it out, little one." Margaret encouraged. "You know this word." Free." Hannah sounded carefully. "Freedom. Excellent. You're reading so well." Eli hung up his coat, watching them. Margaret's patience seemed endless, her praise genuine. Hannah glowed under her attention. After supper, Hannah fell asleep on the rug before the fire, exhausted from the day's lessons. Eli carried her to bed while Margaret cleaned the kitchen. When he returned, he found her mending by the dying fire, her needle moving with practiced grace. He should go to bed. He should maintain his distance. Instead, he poured himself coffee and sat in the chair opposite her. The silence stretched, comfortable yet weighted. Finally, Eli spoke. "You were a school teacher." Margaret's hand stilled briefly. "Yes, in Missouri." "How did you come to answer my advertisement in such He paused, searching for words that weren't cruel. Such poverty. She finished for him, no bitterness in her tone. He nodded. She set down her mending, folding her hands in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady. My father was a respected man in our town, a merchant. I was educated, taught school for 3 years. When he died last spring, I discovered he'd left nothing but debts. She paused, and Eli saw the pain cross her features before she composed herself. I sold everything, the house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry, everything to pay what he owed. I kept only my integrity, and the teaching position given to a married woman. A widow without family ties was considered unsuitable. She spoke without self-pity. No family remained to help. No prospects emerged. I saw your advertisement in the St. Louis paper. A widower with a child, seeking a partner for a frontier life. She met his eyes directly. I could have borrowed fine clothes, Mr. Mercer. Could have pretended prosperity to make myself more appealing. But I will not build a life on deception. You deserve to know exactly who stands before you, a woman who lost everything material but refused to lose her honor. Eli sat back, struck silent. She'd chosen honesty over advantage, dignity over desperation. His wife had possessed that same fierce integrity. That took courage, he said finally. More than most men I know. Something softened in her expression. Thank you for saying so. They sat in silence then, but it was different, less guarded. More like two people beginning to understand each other. The next day, Hannah fell while playing and cut her knee on a stone, before Eli could react. Margaret was there, calm, gentle, skilled. She cleaned the wound with careful hands, soothed the tears with soft words, and within minutes had Hannah laughing about her battle scar. Eli watched, his throat tight. This woman in rags possessed more worth than any he'd ever known. That night, he left the carved wooden flower on the kitchen table. In the morning, it was gone. He found it later on Margaret's windowsill, catching the winter light. Neither of them mentioned it. But something unspoken had passed between them, fragile as frost, but present. The third week of January brought Eli to town for supplies. He drove the wagon through snow-packed streets, his breath clouding in the bitter air. The general store was warm and crowded with townsfolk escaping the cold. He'd barely begun gathering supplies when Widow Carson descended upon him, her circle of gossips in tow. Eli Mercer, she cooed, her smile sharp as icicles. We've been wondering about you. Word has it you've taken in your mail-order bride. Eli's jaw tightened. I have. And is it true, another woman interjected, that she arrived in rags on Christmas Eve? No less. Her circumstances were modest, Eli said carefully. The widow clucked her tongue. Such a shame. A man of your standing. Eli, your Sarah was from good family. And now, well, she leaned closer, voice dropping to false sympathy. A proper woman would have had means. What kind of breeding produces such poverty? Her companion added. The girl must have been truly desperate. It's practically charity. What you've done? What will people say? The widow shook her head. And think of your daughter. What example does this set? Eli gathered his supplies with deliberate calm. But their words burrowed under his skin like splinters. He paid quickly and left, their whispers following him into the cold. The ride home felt endless. Their voices echoed in his mind. What kind of breeding? Truly desperate. Practically charity. He saw Margaret through their eyes, suddenly shabby. Unsuitable. A woman no better than a beggar. Doubt crept in like frost through a cracked window. Had he been foolish? Was he exposing Hannah to someone unsuitable? Pride, that old familiar poison, whispered. Its accusations. He arrived home to find Margaret and Hannah making bread, flour dusting both their faces. They looked up with matching smiles, and guilt joined doubt in his chest. Papa, we're making cinnamon rolls. Miss Margaret's teaching me her grandmother's recipe. That's fine, Hannah, Eli said flatly, and saw Margaret's smile fade. She sensed the shift immediately. Something shadowed her eyes, understanding. Perhaps she'd seen this before. He realized, the moment when social pressure outweighed personal conviction. Over the next 2 days, Eli withdrew further. He took meals in silence, avoided Margaret's attempts at conversation, stayed longer in the barn. The careful warmth they'd built began to freeze. Hannah felt it most. Her bright spirit dimmed, her chatter quieted. She watched her father with confused, wounded eyes. On the third evening, Eli stood outside Hannah's door, about to enter for her bedtime prayers, when he heard her trembling voice. Miss Margaret, are you going to leave us too, like Mama did? The question, asked in his daughter's desperate voice, cut through him like winter wind. Margaret's reply was gentle but strained. I'm here now, little one. I'm here. But even Hannah heard the uncertainty in those words. Eli retreated to the barn, his heart a battlefield. The widow's words warred with what his eyes had seen. Margaret's worth fought against society's judgment. Snow began falling again, heavy and relentless, mirroring the storm within him. Night deepened around the cabin. Eli sat in the barn, moonlight casting silver shadows through the small window. His father's old Bible lay on the workbench, Sarah's ribbon still marking a page from 2 years ago. He opened it with trembling hands. Sarah's handwriting filled the margin beside a verse. Her script neat and familiar. Worth is measured by character, not circumstance. Remember this, my love. His vision blurred. Sarah had written that during their first year of marriage, when he'd worried he wasn't providing enough. She'd always seen deeper than surfaces. His father's voice echoed in memory. A man's measure ain't in what he owns, but in what he's willing to give. What was he willing to give? The cabin door creaked, and faint sound drifted across the yard. Margaret's voice, soft and melodic, singing Hannah to sleep. The melody was unfamiliar but achingly tender. Eli rose and crossed to the cabin, his boots crunching softly on snow. He entered quietly, moving through the kitchen to the hallway. There. He stopped in the shadows. Margaret sat beside Hannah's bed, her threadbare dress clean and pressed despite its patches. Lamplight softened her features as she smoothed his daughter's hair. Hannah's small hand gripped Margaret's fingers with complete trust. Miss Margaret. Hannah's voice was thick with approaching sleep. Yes, little one. I love you. Please don't go away like Mama did. Eli's breath caught. Margaret leaned down and kissed Hannah's forehead gently. Hush now, little bird. I'm right here. Hannah's eyes closed, her breathing evening into sleep. Margaret stayed, still stroking her hair, humming softly. Eli watched, and everything became clear. This woman in rags possessed more worth than any fortune. She'd lost everything material and still chose honesty over deception, dignity over desperation, kindness over bitterness. She loved his daughter with genuine tenderness, asked nothing for herself, gave everything she had. His wife would have loved her. His daughter already did. And he had been measuring worth by the wrong scale entirely. He'd listened to gossips when he should have trusted his own eyes. He'd let pride poison what could have been healing. And so will I be, he whispered to himself. So will I be. He stepped back from the doorway, his decision crystallizing like ice forming on still water, clear and certain. Tomorrow. He would speak. Tonight. He returned to the barn and worked until dawn, not hiding but preparing. His hands carved with purpose they hadn't held in 2 years. When sunrise painted the sky pink and gold, he held up his finished work, the wooden flower, now complete with delicate leaves and a curved stem, polished smooth with loving care. Beside it on the workbench lay a small box. Inside rested a simple ring, Sarah's mother's. passed down with a note in Sarah's handwriting, for the next woman worthy of your heart, whenever you find her. The coldest winter was breaking. All he had to do was open the door. Morning light flooded the cabin kitchen as Eli stood at the stove, preparing breakfast. His hands moved with purpose he hadn't felt in years. Coffee steamed in the pot, eggs sizzled in the pan. Toast browned over the fire, behind him. He heard Margaret's footsteps pause in the doorway. "Mr. Mercer." Surprise colored her voice. He turned, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Please, sit. Breakfast is nearly ready." She hesitated, then moved to the table, her expression cautious. He'd hurt her with his withdrawal, he saw that now. Her dignity remained intact, but wariness had replaced the tentative warmth of recent weeks. He brought coffee, toast, eggs, set them before her with care. Then he sat across the table, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Margaret," he began, and saw her tense at the use of her name. "I owe you an apology." She waited, her dark eyes giving nothing away. "When you arrived, I looked at you and saw rags. I listened to town gossip and heard judgment." He forced himself to hold her gaze. "But I failed to see what my daughter saw immediately, a woman of courage, integrity, and uncommon worth." Something flickered in her expression, hope. Perhaps. Carefully guarded. "You could have come to me and borrowed finery and pleasant lies," he continued. "Instead, you came in truth, offering exactly who you are. That takes more courage than any man I know." He paused, gathering strength for what came next. "My wife died believing that character matters more than circumstance. I nearly forgot that lesson." His voice roughened. "Thank you for reminding me." Margaret's eyes glistened, but she remained silent, waiting. Eli reached into his pocket and withdrew the carved flower, setting it on the table between them. Beside it, he placed the small box. "I've watched you these weeks," he said. "Your kindness to Hannah, your dignity despite hardship, your strength in facing judgment. I see your worth, Margaret, all of it." He opened the box, revealing the simple ring. "This was my wife's mother's ring. Sarah left it with a note for the next woman worthy of my heart." Margaret's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I choose you," Eli said, his own voice breaking. "Not despite your circumstances, but because of who you are within them. Your poverty doesn't diminish you, it reveals you. When you lost everything, you kept your honor. That's worth more than any fortune." He reached across the table and took her hand, the first intentional touch between them. Her fingers were warm in his, trembling slightly. "Will you stay? Margaret, not as arrangement, but as family, not as charity, but as chosen, not as obligation, but as—" He stopped, the word too large for his wounded heart to speak. But she understood. She always had. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Eli, I will stay, and I will spend every day proving your trust well placed." Her tears fell freely now, not of sorrow, but of being truly seen, truly known, truly chosen. He squeezed her hand, and felt something long frozen begin to thaw. From the hallway came small running footsteps. Hannah burst into the kitchen, having heard everything. "Papa, Miss Margaret. Does this mean she's staying forever? Does this mean she'll be my—" She stopped, afraid to speak the word aloud. Margaret opened her arms, and Hannah flew into them. "I'm staying, little bird, I'm staying." Hannah's sobs of joy filled the cabin as she clung to Margaret with all her small strength. Then she reached for her father, pulling him into their circle. Eli wrapped his arms around them, both his daughter and the woman he'd chosen. The three of them held each other while morning light streamed through the window, illuminating them like a benediction, for the first time in 2 years. Eli smiled, and his heart, so long armored in grief, began to beat with hope again. Sunday arrived cold and clear. Eli helped Margaret into the wagon. Noting how she wore her threadbare dress with quiet dignity, he'd offered to buy her new clothes, but she'd declined. "Let them see who you chose," she'd said. "Let there be no deception." Hannah sat between them, holding both their hands, forming a bridge. Eli flicked the reins, and the horses moved forward toward town. At church, the congregation turned as they entered. Eli felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispers begin. He squared his shoulders and guided Margaret and Hannah down the aisle to their pew. After the service, Widow Carson approached, her smile fixed and false. "Eli, dear," she cooed, "so good to see you. And this must be Mrs. Carson," Eli interrupted, his voice carrying clearly. "I'd like to properly introduce my intended wife, Margaret." The widow's expression sharpened, ready to deliver some cutting remark. But Eli continued before she could speak. "She came to me with nothing but her character, and I found it worth more than any fortune I've ever known. I reckon that's the truest wealth there is." Silence fell around them. The widow's companions exchanged glances. Eli wasn't finished. And if this town measures worth by cloth rather than character, then this town has some learning yet to do. He offered Margaret his arm. She took it, her head high, her dignity unshakable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mr. Thompson, the blacksmith, stepped forward. He removed his hat and bowed slightly to Margaret. "Well said. Mercer, we'd be honored to welcome you to our community. Miss Margaret, anyone with sense can see quality when it stands before them." His wife joined him, taking Margaret's hand warmly. "We'd love to have you for supper sometime. Our door is always open." Others followed the banker's wife, the schoolmaster, the Reverend himself. The tide turned, gossip giving way to grace, judgment yielding to generosity. Even the widow managed a tight smile before retreating. The ride home was peaceful. Hannah chattered about the Reverend's sermon while Margaret and Eli exchanged glances that spoke more than words could convey as they approached the cabin. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop. "What is it, Papa?" Hannah asked. But he was looking at the cabin doorstep, where something had caught his eye. He climbed down and helped Margaret and Hannah to the ground. There, beneath the melting snow, pushing up through the cold earth, green shoots emerged, purple and gold crocus heads just beginning to open. Hannah spotted them and gasped. "Papa Mama's flowers are coming back." She knelt beside them, touching the delicate petals with wonder. Margaret knelt beside her, her threadbare dress trailing in the snow. "They've been there all along, little one," Margaret said softly. "Just waiting beneath the surface, waiting for warmth to help them bloom." Eli understood perfectly. Hope didn't die when love was lost. It waited patient and persistent for someone brave enough to let it grow again. He joined them, kneeling in the snow, for a long moment. The three of them regarded the flowers small, brave, certain of the spring to come. Then Eli stood and offered Margaret his hand. She took it, her eyes meeting his with a trust that humbled him. "Welcome home, Margaret," he said. She rose, her smile radiant despite her poverty, beautiful because of her worth. "I believe I am home, Eli, finally and truly home." Hannah took her father's other hand, and together three where there had been two. Whole where there had been broken, they stepped across the cabin threshold. Inside, the fire burned warm. On the table, Margaret's carved wooden flower stood in a cup beside Sarah's Bible. Old love honoring new. Outside, the winter sun broke fully through the clouds, flooding the land with golden promise. The crocus flowers stood guard by the door, purple and gold against the white snow-brave harbingers of spring, proof that beauty survives even the harshest winter. Through the window, three silhouettes moved about the golden-lit cabin: father, daughter, and the woman chosen not despite her rags, but because of her radiant worth. Their laughter mingled with the crackling fire, filling spaces long left empty. Home isn't where you hang your hat. The old saying goes, it's where your heart learns to trust again. And in that cabin on the Wyoming frontier, where winter was surrendering to spring and grief was yielding to hope, three hearts had found exactly that. The coldest winter breaks when someone's brave enough to open the door. Eli had opened his, and Grace, wearing threadbare clothes and carrying only her integrity, had walked through